So we're very lucky to have the director of the film, Michaël Roskam. Star of the film, Noomi Rapace. And one of the great modern writers of crime fiction, even though he's a Red Sox fan, Dennis Lehane. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Good evening.
I guess I want to start with you, because this movie, I want to start with the fact that it's set in Brooklyn, and it's filmed largely in Brooklyn, and you can always tell, how many people from Brooklyn are there in the audience today? I think you can always tell when it's Toronto and not really Brooklyn. So just what was it like filming here and finding those locations?
Well, first of all, I'm from Belgium, so in the beginning, I mean, I love the script, and of course the first thing, I mean, with Bullhead, for me, the authenticity of the background and the place, the universe where we're making this story happen has to be real. So I was aware of the fact, I mean, I'm not from Brooklyn, so I mean, I'm going to have to portray it in a way, and so I decided to be faithful, not only to trying to be faithful to the Brooklyn as it is today, but also to the tradition of how Brooklyn has been portrayed in the arts, as long as it's been portrayed, you know. And Nicholas, the DP, showed me a great painter called George Bellows, who is a Brooklyn painter who made his work in the beginning of the 20th century. And he made these beautiful, you know, city life scenes of Brooklyn. And he had a show, just like the weeks before we start shooting, there was a show of him in the museum here in New York. So I used actually that kind of Brooklyn representation and transferred it to the Brooklyn as I saw it. So I'm never going to claim like this is the real Brooklyn. It is like, I think, a Brooklyn that I wanted especially to be faithful to representing the colors as I found it in the paintings. And Brooklyn itself, of course, we have a bar, and there's a lot of scenes in this bar, so I had to find bars. I've seen like, I don't know, 200 bars in Brooklyn, and that gives you a pretty good idea who the people of Brooklyn are. You know.
How many of those 200 do you remember?
One. No, many. We actually built a bar. It was an out-of-business bar, and we only did the counter was still there, and we stripped it totally and kind of made the ideal bar based on 3 different ones that we saw. One in Greenpoint, one in Bay Ridge, and one in Marine Park. So.
Now, Noomi, we talked a few days ago, and you told me how this is your first full movie filmed in New York, right? Full start to finish?
Yeah, I was here a little bit on Dead Man Down, but this is yeah.
So what's that like? Because you grew up watching it on the big screen in Sweden. I mean, what was it like being here?
Well, I always dreamt about kind of making a movie in New York and being a part of a movie, a New York movie. There's something very romantic about it, and I remember that I fell in love with the script immediately when I read it, and but I was kind of afraid that we will be kind of, you know, thrown into a studio somewhere in a city far away, pretending that it would be Brooklyn. And when we met and you said it was crucial for you, that it was really important to shoot it on real locations and find spots and places in Brooklyn, I knew that would kind of bring... It's almost like Brooklyn is almost like a character in the movie. And without that, it would, you know, we would have kind of been forced to pretend more. And now it kind of gave us a lot of things that we can work on. And I also like to do research and be out and be around people and watch people and listen and absorb, and, you know. So it made me really happy, and I loved it.
Now, Dennis, this is you adapted this movie off of your short story, Animal Rescue. So how did your previous cinematic experiences help you write the script? I mean, what was that like?
I don't know that they did. I don't know that the previous cinematic experiences, because those were adaptations of my books that I had nothing to do with except to consult, because I don't want to adapt my own books, because it's, I don't have the perspective to know what 80% of that book I have to throw out to make a good movie. So, yeah, I'd know. I think maybe my TV work helped a lot. I think, I had a pretty intensive training for a couple of 3 years on The Wire, so that helped a lot. That really helped me do the script. The thing is, I'm a novelist though, so all my scripts are way too talky, and I just cut it all right at the end. Once you get good actors, then you just start cutting scripts,
Speaking of good actors, I understand you added some lines when Gandolfini was cast.
Well, yeah, it says something to the types of acting styles you had. When Tom Hardy was cast, the moment Tom Hardy was cast, I said, all right, that's an actor who does a ton with stillness. He conveys so much with his eyes. You see, he's amazing at that. I think he's the best working today at that. So I went in and I slashed his dialogue by, I'd say, about 30%. And then when Gandolfini was hired, I went in and I added at least probably 20% to his dialogue, because he turned street speech into a symphony. I mean, that's just what the guy did. I mean, he made a meal out of it. And the first funny line in the film, the first line that gets a laugh, was one of the lines I added. And that was pretty gratifying. So.
Don't suppose you want to spill it?
Can I spill it on a podcast? Okay. Bob is obsessing over the dog that he's found, and Gandolfini's character doesn't care, and really doesn't care at all. And he's going on about the dog, and finally Cousin Marv says, "It's a dog. It's not some long-lost retard relative shows up on your door with a colostomy bag looking for a place to stay. It's a dog." And if you look closely, you can see Tom trying not to laugh. He blew a bunch of takes because he just kept laughing. Because Gandolfini he added the phrase, "hanging out of your ass," actually. It was a long-lost relative with a colostomy bag. He added hanging out of your ass. So he could just make a meal out of dialogue, and it was a joy.
I want to set up the first clip that we're going to see. It's probably not the wisest thing to do to start with an animal, but this is such a cute dog that we get to see. One of the major stars of the movie, Rocco. The character is Rocco. But tell me a little bit about, it must be hard working with puppies. They're not necessarily the most cooperative of actors.
We had the best puppy in the world. He did exactly what he needed to be. A dog, a puppy.
So much more disciplined than the actors.
Yeah, that dog was always on time. No, he was, that was one of the first things that I said, like, I'm not going to turn this thing into Lassie or something, that seems to talk to you and understand when you're like, say something. It's a dog. It's not like a long-lost relative with a... Anyways, and we said, let's just let it be a dog, literally. We would never... We had the camera, we did some kind of a thing, and I always made like kind of little setups that we could have the dog do what it needed to do, and had like Tom interact with it in a very natural way, and it was easy. I mean, it was a puppy. It couldn't like really run off for like 2 miles and then get lost or something. It was just always trying to follow you, and it was not that bad. Huh? It was cool.
Should we roll the clip, or?
Yeah.
Did anyone get to keep the dog after the shoot?
Yeah.
I want to turn a little bit more serious for a second, because we were talking a little bit about James, and it's sad to say that this is his last cinematic performance, but it is an incredibly riveting one. And I'm just wondering, you told me the story about the first time you met him. I'm just wondering if you can each just tell me a little bit about getting to meet him and work with him.
Was that in the restaurant?
The one in the
restaurant, yeah.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah. Well, I had Jim a couple of times. Jim. Everybody calls him Jim. So I had him on the phone a couple of times. He was in LA, and then like I think 2 weeks or a week and a half before the shoot, he was going to come over to New York, and we were staying at. We had dinner. Matthias, who's playing Eric Dietz in the movie. Matthias Schoenaerts, Noomi and I were having dinner in the White Hotel in Brooklyn, Williamsburg. And we were talking, and he was like, "Yeah, tomorrow, you know, Jim's gonna meet Jim. You know, it's my first time. I mean, I'm a fan, so I was like really excited." And suddenly, I see Jim and his friend walking in the bar, and he was like, and everybody's like, I mean, he's very impressive when he walks in. It's James Gandolfini, but he is also very, you know, a presence. And people like turning on one, and I said, "Oh my God, it's Jim! It's Jim!" I'm totally like, and then without thinking, I just jumped up, like, "Whoa, Jim! It's me!" He's like, "Who are you?" I'm like, I'm Michaël, the director, you know, from, hey man, yeah, because we didn't know how I looked like, you know, so, and then he was like really, he thought I was a fan, you know.
It was funny because he was like,
oh.
I got really shy, you know, I'm not really shy normally, but and I remember I stood up and I shook his hand, and his hands are like 3 times my hand. It was like, and then I just sat down. It was like, he was like, his charisma was so strong. And I remember, like, you know, we were just like small people next to him.
Yeah, it's like so funny when I hold just a normal cup of coffee. When Jim holds that cup, it looks like an espresso, you know.
How about you, Dennis?
We actually, it haunts me. Jim and I played phone tag, then we tried to set up a dinner, and then it just didn't come together because I was on the other side of Brooklyn working on Boardwalk Empire, and it was really hard for me to get back and forth. And that's the really tragic thing. When you make a movie, you always say, "Oh, we'll see them at the premiere." It's just in your head. You'll see them at the festival. You'll see them at the, you know. So we never met.
Are we ready for that clip? I was wondering if they were going to show the rest of what was in that bag, but save that for the ticket bars. I do want to definitely seem very evocative of his Sopranos character, more than almost anything he's done on the big screen. And I'm just wondering, you know, when you're watching him perform, we had talked about that basement scene, which to me is one of the high points of the movie. What's it like being there in the moment and just sort of feeling that on the other side of the monitor?
It's magic, but I mean, it's, of course, there are some of those moments when, I mean, some scenes, I mean, you're building up in the story and you make scenes to get, you know, like highlight at a certain point in the story, you know, to the end or somewhere in the middle. I mean, it has its own goal. Shooting a film, you actually, you try to shoot every scene as if it's the final scene. You cannot like just like, you know, it's not an important, no, they're not like not important scenes. So it was always like, if I see Noomi and Matthias or Noomi on her own, I mean, it's always magical. It's with Jim, it's with Tom. I mean, I remember with Noomi we're doing, there was a scene in the kitchen. It's not in the movie, but when she was doing the makeup, like there was something that we might have used at the time. And that's magical as well. You always have to make that whatever you do, every day, between action and cut, it has to be magic. There's no winner or loser. So, but I admit there were moments, and that scene in the cellar where Jim and Tom particularly were really having something, and especially because it was one of the first scenes that they played together.
But do you remember that I came to the house when you were shooting that scene? And because you started, you were working with James in the morning, and I was going to come in after lunch. So they were waiting for me in makeup, and I came in. I just wanted to say hi to you and say hi to Tom and Jimmy. And then you were in the middle of the scene, and I kind of, you know, sneaked in and sat down next to you, and I was looking at the monitor, and I was blown away. I couldn't go. Like, they were waiting for me in makeup, and my PA was like waving, and like, they really need you. And I was like, no, I gotta stay. I gotta stay. Do you remember that? I was like glued. It was like I couldn't leave. I just felt that it was something happening in that scene that was pure. It was so real, and it was so alive, and every take was different. And I was like, there's no way I can go into makeup. I gotta see this.
It's true. It was pretty cool. I mean, and of course, in the light of everything that happened now, I mean, you look back at it in a different way. That's the nature of our emotions and our memories. But of course, at the time, it was already fantastic to see Jim perform. I just recently came up with like, how can I express why I wanted Jim for the part? Is like I say I love steak and fries, and I love my wife, and I love my child, and I love my cappuccino, and I love James Gandolfini. You know, it's just that. You know, I just like the guy playing that way. And all the fans are lucky guys, and all the guys who don't like it, they're missing something. So I pity them.
You know, this is such a great actors movie, and I want to ask you, Dennis, when you, way back in the beginning, when you were putting pen to paper, I guess that's archaic, but where did the germ of the idea come from? Because this isn't like a big score caper movie. This is very much
no, not at all. This is really, I'm a big film fanatic, and this was mostly inspired by films of the early 1970s. That's what I was after, the kind of vibe of like Sidney Lumet films or The French Connection or Scarecrow or, you know, which were a little shaggy around the edges, which is what I kind of wanted. I wanted that feel of, I keep saying that even sitting with the audience, the first half an hour with the audience on this movie, the reaction you can feel in the room is, what the is going on? I mean, there's just this sense of the movie kind of, it zigs when you think it's going to zag, it zags when you, and you're trying to, and then it all starts to come together. It's like I've got a lot of disparate stories here, and then they're all going to dovetail. But you have to slowly go on that journey, and then when you get there, it's like hopefully extremely worthwhile. So when I was first putting pen to paper, I just wanted. I have this sense that loneliness kills more people than cancer, and that we don't talk about it enough, or we don't really investigate it because it scares us all. And so I started with this idea. It was Christmas. It was 2001 when I took the first crack at this, not as a script, but as part of a novel. And I remember thinking, it's Christmas. Suicides are highest in the United States around Christmas. It's 2 days after Christmas. What do you see on the streets 2 days after Christmas? You see a bunch of Christmas presents laying in the trash. And I started thinking about a guy who was very lonely and very sad and hanging on maybe by his fingernails, walking home through that. And then all of a sudden, in the tradition, and this is how we do it, you know, I love these. I mean, I don't know. I know authors who do outline. I'm not one of them. I'm just walking along. I'm with the guy. He's walking along. I'm painting the scene. And then all of a sudden, the next sentence I write is, he heard something. Well, that's interesting. What did he hear? You know, and I sit back and I think about what could he hear? And then I start, and then the word that came to mind was keening. And I wrote keening. He hears a keening. Okay, there's a puppy in a barrel. That's where it all began.
It must be wonderful to be you.
No,
I would love to have that.
No, it's quite terrible sometimes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you go, I mean, the nature of the beast is a lot of times you go, oh, it's a puppy in a, here's the perfect example. It's a puppy in a trash can. He finds the puppy in the trash can. He meets Noomi's character. That's you know, he meets Nadia. All of this was in the very original conception of the story. And then the rest of the novel kicked out on me. It wouldn't come together. I had this nice story with this guy, Bob, this woman, Nadia, and this psychopath named Eric Deeds. And that's all I had. And every other story that I was trying to tell in that novel just collapsed. And so I shelved the novel. And 5 years later, I kept thinking about whatever happened to that guy who found the dog in the trash can, and I wrote it as a short story. And then somebody bought the short story and said, would you do it as a screenplay? And I was like, this guy just won't go home. And so I just kept writing Bob. I've been writing Bob now since December of 2001. So.
I want to ask you, Noomi, real quick, because the next clip that we're going to see is another scene between you and Tom. And it seems like you guys had a great chemistry. And then right after this, you filmed another movie, is that right?
Yeah, Child 44, right?
Yeah. Tell me about that and what it's like when you're working on multiple projects, if that just sort of helps you going from one to another like that.
Yeah, I met Tommy maybe 2 years before we shot The Drop. And we connected, you know, like straight away. And he said that he was a great fan of my work. And I was, you know, I remember when I saw Bronson and I was so blown away. I was like, I got to work with this guy. And then we met and we connected and we were trying to find something to do. And then Fox Searchlight sent me the Animal Rescue, as it was called then. And I loved it. And I remember I texted Tommy and I was like, this could be it. maybe this is the first thing we should do together. And then Child 44 came along, and we went. Yeah, I think we had like 4 weeks between the drop and Child. But the beauty with a working relationship, that when you trust each other and you can, you can allow yourself to take risks. And you don't need to pretend that you know when you don't know. You can allow yourself to be stupid and to do really bad takes. And I felt that in this whole ensemble with Michaël and Matthias and Tom, that I didn't feel that I had to prove anything. I could come in and just work and explore and see where it was going to lead us. And that I have with Tom very much. And I love that. That's the perfect work relationship for me.
I don't know. That's a good way to lead into the final clip that we're going to see. Well, we want to make sure that you guys can ask some questions, so there are some mics floating around.
Hi. Dennis, your work is just amazing, and Mystic River was just one of my absolute all-time favorites. And Dennis, what I wanted to say was, as a writer, I put together a piece, and it's actually what you said just rang so truthful to me, in that I wrote a two-part novel, and it's 600 pages, and I need to adapt that into 2 screenplays, and I don't know what to cut, and it's just impossible as a writer to figure out the perspective of what is going to make a film and what to do for a screenplay.
Dennis, did you have any advice about what to cut, how to decide what to cut? Or
Yeah, well, that's why I don't do my own adaptations. I was at a thing once with the late great writer Donald Westlake, and I was at this big mystery thing. There was a whole bunch of us in an island in the Caribbean. It was awesome. It was one of those. It's a great gig. And I was with my friend George Pelicanos, and we were thinking the same thing at the time. This is like 15 years ago. And Westlake's up on stage, and somebody said, "Mr. Westlake, you've done all these great screenplays. You've done these amazing adaptations, The Grifters and Stepfather and all these others, but you've never adapted your own work. Why is that?" And he says, "Only a moron adapts his own work." And me and George looked at each other like, that's good. If he says it's good enough for us, and I've never adapted my own novel since, and I never will. It's nuts. I mean, cutting 600 pages down to 120, I can't even imagine.
I remember you said something beautiful the other day. It's like, having a child and then decide, like, should I take that arm or should I take the leg off? Or, it's, and I can understand that.
It's just I'm not the guy to trust, so.
Noomi, a couple questions. Talk about the contrast between working with Tom and working with James in this film, because they're 2 very different actors, and I think they have very different styles in the way they approach characters or express them. Or maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you have some insight to them that I don't know. And then I'd also like to hear, because I haven't as yet seen the film, I'd like to hear how this character is alike or different from some of the other characters that you've played, because you've played some fairly dark characters who've gone through some pretty difficult times, and some are more victims and less victims. So I'd like to hear you comment on that.
Well, I can start by saying that I didn't really have scenes with James. He was mostly interacting with Tommy, and had a little bit with Matthias. But I met him on set, and he. For me, what made me very happy, and what I still kind of carry with me, is that when I got to know him a little bit, I realized that he was, he's been doing all those amazing films. He's been, he did so much, such a great work, but still, by being in the business so long, but and managing to maintain a real person, to be so grounded, so loving, so respectful, and so real, and not being like carried away with all the weirdness and stupidity that kind of can infect our business. That was something that I still think about actually with him. So that it's not really me working with him, but him as a person. But working with Tommy for me is I think. I adore him, and it's quite rare that you meet someone that you feel that you can do pretty much anything with, because you're safe and he has my back, and we're kind of on a journey together, and it's and you give each other, and then you can grow. Nadia, I remember you said to me once that she's like a broken angel, and I think that describes her in a way. She's a young woman with a troubled past. She was had a relationship with Eric Dietz, Matthias' character, and he's quite complicated and disturbed man. And I think that for me, she's strong. She has a strength. She was living something bad that was really destructive, but she managed to break it and to move on, and kind of forcing herself to find her own voice. Even though she's fragile, when we meet her, she's a fighter, and it can be really hard to leave something, even though you know it's destructive and not good for you. It's safety and it's home base. So to kind of to leave that and to go on into something that is unknown, and it can be more scary than to live in something that is not good for you, actually. So for me, she's a strong person, and she's when we meet her, she's trying to find her new self.
This one's for Michaël. Over here. So I'm just curious, you're not American, you're Belgian. How was it working with, you have Dennis Lehane, who's a fantastic writer, who's worked and most of his novels is all about the underworld of America suburbia. Most of those, that's what he's worked, and it's fantastic. All the stuff is very happy with all your work. It's wonderful. But I was just wondering, how did you feel about working with that? You're working in that kind of, in that very underworld. Did you do a lot of research, or how did you approach this project? Because this is kind of an interesting project to do, and it's about the American underworld, and especially in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, of course, I made a movie myself before the drop in Belgium called Bullhead, and it's also a crime drama. So it is a genre that is, where I have my fascination and I'm very intrigued by that world. And I think most of those stories talk, and especially Dennis' talk about a very universal elements of life. It's very about things that we recognize. That's why the stories that he tells are not just stories that you understand if you're American. I always understood some of these stories, and I was in Belgium, So I think it's. Dennis was a good guide. It was all there. It was written, and of course I did some research. And again, I was very much influenced by American cinema, and especially in Belgium, where the American film culture is a great tradition, and we know a lot about it. There's more. I've seen more American movies than any other. I think in 1 week there are more American movies that come out than we had in the entire history. So, and yeah, I was coming here, and then it's just it's also my job. That's what you do. You go in, you start with looking at bars, talk to people. And you work day in, day out, and you start to feel and to taste it, and we had a fantastic crew, lots of people that were, the producers were from New York, and I met a lot of people, and you just ask, you talk, you listen, and then you create. So it was a challenge, but I liked it, and if you like it, it makes it all kind of easier too, I guess.
Hi, I'm shy, so bear with me. My question is actually for Dennis. I read the short story that the script was based on, and I really connected with the character of Bob. Thought he was a really specific character, very parochial character, specific time and place and age. And I'm wondering, how has he evolved into Brooklyn, into the movie version? Will I find a very different Bob, or will I sort of see the resemblance?
In the movie version, you'll find a slightly different Bob. That one of the things that the biggest change we had, again, this is about a guy who's very lonely, and there's two types of loneliness. One is caused in the story by external factors, and the other is caused by internal factors. The internal factor is that he has decided to be alone. He has consciously decided to disconnect emotionally from the world because it hurts too much to get your heart broken, and B, because of the secret in the movie. There's a reason. It's a motive that drives the movie. The second reason in the story is that he's physically unattractive. He's extremely unattractive. He's overweight. He's got a very ugly face. The moment that they hired Tom Hardy, yeah, we're kind of screwed there, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to work. You can take a bag of hammers, hit Tom in the face with it all day. He's still going to be a good-looking guy who got hit in the face with a couple of hammers. I mean, it just doesn't work. So it became we had to make a decision to go deeper on the internal loneliness, which we did, which made the script actually stronger. The Hardy pass, as I call it, I made a pass once Tom Hardy was cast, and it made it a better script because it becomes such a mystery. Why has this guy disconnected from the world? The world is not disconnecting from him, you know. So, I think it makes it a much more intriguing film in a lot of ways. So, did I choose a pit bull on purpose? I had a friend at Animal Rescue. This is probably where it all started. I had a friend who was working at Animal Rescue in Boston, and she said to me, they put pit bulls down in 30 days. And I said, why? And she said, because nobody wants to take them. And after 30 days, there's a kill order on all pit bulls. And I thought, that doesn't seem right, you know? So I just started with that, you know? So.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to join us. And thank you, Michaël, Noomi, and Dennis. So we're very lucky to have the director of the film, Michaël Roskam. Star of the film, Noomi Rapace. And one of the great modern writers of crime fiction, even though he's a Red Sox fan, Dennis Lehane. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Good evening.
I guess I want to start with you, because this movie, I want to start with the fact that it's set in Brooklyn. And it's filmed largely in Brooklyn. And you can always tell, how many people from Brooklyn are there in the audience today? I think you can always tell when it's Toronto and not really Brooklyn. So just...
yeah.
So what's that like? Because you grew up watching it on the big screen in Sweden. I mean, what was it like being here?
Well, I always dreamt about kind of making a movie in New York and being a part of a movie, a New York movie. There's something very romantic about it. And I remember that I fell in love with the script immediately when I read it, but I was kind of afraid that we will be kind of, you know, thrown into a studio somewhere in a city far away, pretending that it would be Brooklyn. And when we met, and you said it was crucial for you, that it was really important to shoot it on real locations and find spots and places in Brooklyn. I knew that would kind of bring. It's almost like Brooklyn is almost like a character in the movie, and without that, it would. You know,
I don't know, 200 bars in Brooklyn, and that gives you a pretty good idea who the people of Brooklyn are. You know.
How many of those 200 do you remember?
One. No, many. We actually built a bar. It was an out-of-business bar, and we only did the counter was still there, and we stripped it totally and kind of made the ideal bar based on 3 different ones that we saw. One in Greenpoint, one in Bay Ridge, and one in Marine Park. So.
Now, Noomi, we talked a few days ago, and you told me how this is your first full movie filmed in New York, right? Full start to finish?
Yeah, I was here a little bit on Dead Man Down, but this is the...
Who is a Brooklyn painter who made his work in the beginning of the 20th century. And he made these beautiful, you know, city life scenes of Brooklyn. And he had a show, just like the weeks before we started shooting, there was a show of him in the museum here in New York. So I used actually that kind of Brooklyn representation and transferred it to the Brooklyn as I saw it. So I'm never gonna claim like this is the real Brooklyn. It is like, I think, a Brooklyn that I wanted especially to be faithful to representing the colors as I found it in the paintings. And Brooklyn itself, of course, we have a bar, and there's a lot of scenes in this bar, so I had to find bars. I've seen like...
What was it like filming here and finding those locations?
Well, first of all, I'm from Belgium, so in the beginning, I mean, I love the script, and of course, the first thing, I mean, with Bullhead, for me, the authenticity of the background and the place, the universe where we're making this story happen has to be real. So I was aware of the fact, I mean, I'm not from Brooklyn, so, I mean, I'm going to have to portray it in a way. And so I decided to be faithful, not only to trying to be faithful to the Brooklyn as it is today, but also to the tradition of how Brooklyn has been portrayed in the arts, as long as it's been portrayed, you know. And Nicholas, the DP, showed me a great painter called George Bellows,